No, I'm still not reviewing Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, but instead for Halloween this year, I will be taking a look at the Arkham Horror role-playing game by Edge Studios. How is it different than the rest, and is it any different than the board game of the same name? This is a review of Arkham Horror, the role-playing game. Let's dive in. And here we have the Arkham Horror role-playing game, Hungering Abyss, by Edge Studios, copyright in 2024. And I should have mentioned this before, but this is more like a starter set than anything else. So you're gonna have everything that you really need to play right here in the box. Speaking of which, what comes in the said box? Well, we've got the Hungering Abyss book, which actually has the rules and the adventure all in one. We have 5 pre-made characters like William Yorick, we have Rita Young, Carolyn Fern, Daisy Walker, and Joe Diamond. And if these all sound familiar, then you've probably played any iteration of the Arkham Horror games that have been published over the years, whether it's the card game or the actual board game. And the really cool thing is everything that you need as a player is going to be right here on the character sheet. So we have actions, we have things like leveling up, what you're going to pick up and stuff like that, the skills themselves, and we also have the backgrounds for each character, which is always a staple in these types of games. I actually really do enjoy them. And another thing is that each of the characters here will have their own clues that they're bringing to the party, and this will allow you to explore different areas in this adventure that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Aside from that, we do have 3 double-sided maps, such as Joe Diamond's apartment. There's a hospital, which is St. Mary's Hospital, where you're going to find the morgue. There's the area where the final conflict is going to be, so you're trekking through Arkham Woods, and then you'll get to the underground area. There are 7 clues, 3 of which are cards, and these are what you're going to find as evidence along the way for your investigation, which is really cool. I really do like how they look. You know, you've got the blood stains, and then you've got like things that you're gonna have to decipher like that. It's really cool and well put together. I really do enjoy that. We've got tokens for health and sanity. We've got NPC tokens and things like that, all which can be cut out. But the most interesting bit are these little puzzles. These are sliding puzzles that your players are actually going to complete for some of the clues that they're going to get. And I actually really do enjoy that. That's actually a really cool aspect. And I kind of wish, you know, sometimes RPGs would do more of that. So really cool that they've included something like this. And this isn't new for Arkham Horror. I believe they've done this in Mansions of Madness as well. I think the 2nd edition version of that game. There's also a GM screen, which is actually really interesting. It's just a 2-page GM screen, but you're going to have things like the trauma table and the injury table, as well as the actions for investigators. So just a really quick blurb about how combat works and stuff like that. Very interesting that, you know, it doesn't really have a whole lot of information, but the information that it does have is going to be vital for running and playing this game. In addition to that, we've got 2 boxes of dice, a green set and I think a gray set, and there's 12 dice in each, and you'll actually use certain dice for certain effects and things like that. We've also got NPC and monster cards. We've got spells and equipment all right here. I've actually gone ahead and put it inside one of these burger token boxes. And then we've got the NPCs and monster cards themselves with all of their stats. And you got, some of them will have background stuff. The monsters will not. The monsters are just going to be kind of generic, and they're actually double-sided. So not that I really don't, well, I do kind of mind that, because in the end, you know, you might have a night gone to Ravenous School in the same area, but you might not. But in this adventure, chances of them appearing at the same time are going to be very close to nil. So we really don't have to worry about that. But if you do plan on, you know, writing your own stuff, you might be a little bit perturbed by that. The rules for the game are actually mixed in with this starting adventure, the Hungering Abyss. I'm actually not really a big fan of this mixing. I'd much rather have all the rules up front or in its own separate book so I can look things up easily. And I would imagine with a new system as a GM, even if you're more experienced, you are going to be looking up these rules quite a bit. I do see the appeal. I mean, you're teaching new GMs and players the rules of this new game, and you want to make it progressive, but I still would rather just have everything all at once. For quick reference, there are two different modes of play for this game. We have narrative scenes, which are low stakes play, such as investigations or clue seeking, social interactions, and things like that. And then there's structured play, which is primarily combat. Each investigator has a number of dice available to them for a given scene. This number equates to the investigator's current health, and each investigator starts with 6 health. The less health an investigator has, the less dice that they are allowed to roll. If the investigators run out of dice during a narrative scene, but still have tasks they want to accomplish, a new narrative scene begins, and the GM determines approximately how long the scene took the group. If an investigator runs out of dice during a narrative scene, but other characters still have dice, the investigator can still communicate and plan with the group, but their character is busy with the task they chose to do and must wait for a new narrative scene to perform additional actions. This ensures each character has an equal chance to act during this time. I'm not a big fan of this style of play because a character may be out of actions while other characters still have dice, but that player is still allowed to communicate, thus you're still influencing the scene. If an investigator wants to perform a complex action such as disengaging from an enemy, healing both horror and wounds, attacking and reloading while under pressure, they can spend any number of dice for that action. There are 10 skills on a character sheet. We have agility, athletics, intuition, knowledge, lore, melee combat, presence, ranged combat, resolve, and wits. Agility is how agile, flexible, and physically maneuverable you are. Athletics is how physically strong you are and your general endurance. Intuition is how well you can sense others' motivations or intentions. Knowledge is how well you can recall facts, tap into general knowledge, or research a topic. Lore encompasses all the otherworldly and occult abilities present in the setting. Melee combat is how well you can fight in close quarters combat. Presence is how socially adept you are, how well you can persuade, deceive, or intimidate others. Ranged combat is how well you perform with ranged weapons like guns or even thrown objects. Resolve is how well you can keep calm under pressure. And wits is how clever and mentally quick you are. Now, each skill has a number associated with it, from 2+ to 6+. 2 is the best, while 6 is the worst. After picking a number of dice for a skill test, you're going to roll them. If at least one die roll is at or above the number listed for that skill, you pass. For example, if you have a wits value of 4+, then you need at least to roll a 4, 5, or 6 to succeed at the wits test. Like with many modern game systems, Arkham Horror does make use of advantage and disadvantage. With advantage, you add 1 additional die to the pool before rolling. After rolling, you're going to remove 1 die with the lowest result from the pool. My only gripe with this is, why bother removing the lowest die if you're looking for the die that rolls over your skill number? Disadvantage is the opposite, where you add 1 additional die to the pool before rolling, but after you roll, you remove the die with the highest result from the pool. Removing the die in this instance makes more sense. At the beginning of a session, investigators gain insight up to their insight maximum. They can spend insight in the following ways. After performing a successful complex action, they can spend 1 insight to add 1 additional success to the result. Before performing a complex action or reaction, they can spend 1 insight to perform the action with advantage. They may spend 1 or more insight to introduce a narrative element into an ongoing scene, and insight can be spent to avoid effects of certain traumas where listed. Structured scenes are for when the stakes are high, such as combat. If the investigators are not surprised, then they simply act first. After all the investigators and their allies take their turn, the GM takes their turn. On an investigator's turn, you will refill your dice pool to your current health. Next, you're going to take actions. The investigators and their allies can act in any order and can split up their actions however they want. When an investigator acts, their player describes what the investigator is trying to do and, if appropriate, performs a complex action by rolling dice using the most relevant skill to determine whether the action succeeds. The turn ends when each investigator and NPC ally has used all their dice or has chosen to keep some left over by passing. This is needed for reactions, such as dodge, block, and resist. To attack a target, a character performs a complex action using one of the following skills. Use melee combat to make a standard non-magic melee attack against a target within 5 feet of you. If two characters are within 5 feet of one another, they are considered to be engaged with the other. Used ranged combat to make a standard non-magic ranged attack against a target more than 5 feet away from you. Ranged attack requires a ranged weapon or an object that can be thrown. These weapons usually have a maximum range at which they can be used, listed in their item profile. Use lore to make a magic attack using a magical knack or capability. When a character's dice pool is at 0, they are wounded. The only thing a character can do when they are wounded is strain themselves. A character can strain themselves at the start of their turn or at the start of a narrative scene as long as their dice pool limit has been reduced below their dice pool maximum. Straining themselves is not an action. It is a choice that a character makes before their dice pool refills. If they choose to strain themselves, the character's dice pool limit is healed up to their original dice pool maximum, and they then suffer 1 injury. When a character becomes injured, their player makes an injury roll by rolling a d6, and the Game Master consults the injury results table to determine the result. The character suffers the injury listed in the appropriate row. This table can be found on the Game Master's game board. If the character already has any injuries when they gain a new one, then for each pre-existing injury, the player adds +1 to the dice roll before they consult the injury results table. And I actually really do agree with that. To heal from an injury, a character must rest for the amount of time noted in the injury's description and fulfill any other requirements the description specifies. An injury can heal only during a narrative scene. A character can have several injuries at the same time, but they can suffer the same injury more than once only if it makes narrative sense. And then there's horror damage. Certain situations, knacks, spells, and abilities deal horror damage. When a character suffers horror damage, their player replaces a number of dice up to their current dice pool limit with horror dice equal to the damage they suffered. These dice obviously should be of a different color to make it clear which dice are horror and which are not. If the dice pool is partially spent, they replace the spent dice first, as long as those dice would refill at the start of their turn. When any character performs a complex action using 1 or more horror dice, and at least 1 horror die rolls a 1, the character suffers a trauma. And there's a nice little handy-dandy trauma chart on the GM screen. It should be worth mentioning that traumas cannot be healed, but the effects of them do go away over time. Once again, these rules are split apart until you need them in the adventure. We have the narrative rules before scene 1 starts, and then we have the combat rules before scene 2 starts. The character sheets do have a quick guide, and the GM screen does provide some information, but it isn't as in-depth as you would find in this book itself. Hungering Abyss is divided into 3 acts. There are 10 scenes overall, and you may or may not go through all of them. If you've ever played Arkham Horror, the card game, you'll find many similarities between Night of the Zealot and this adventure. At first I was a little dismayed that they would just recycle an adventure, but there are some notable differences here, and I would say that Hungering Abyss is a little bit more detailed, as it should be since it's a role-playing game and not a card game. Act 1, The Howl of the Hounds, has 3 different scenes. Scene 1, Let's Get Our Story Straight, serves as the introduction to narrative scenes. The investigators begin at Joe Diamond's house. Depending on which characters you have chosen, you'll have certain clues at your disposal. This is really just for the players to introduce their investigators and go over leads and make a plan on where they want to go next. Scene 2, We're Not Alone, is a structure scene and an introduction to combat. Ghouls attack the house, and they are controlled by a ghoul priest who waits outside. The investigators learn very quickly that all the doors and windows are missing and have been replaced by an arcane barrier. This is also where the first puzzle comes into play. Once the investigators have dispatched of the ghouls, they meet Lita Chandler in Scene 3, who is out for vengeance against the ghouls that plague Arkham City. The players can either accept her aid and knowledge or reject her. Act 2, Cultists Among Us, is a series of 3 scenes, of which the players can move through in any order depending on the leads available to them and where they want to go. Scene 4 has the investigators explore St. Mary's Hospital to examine a dead body ravaged by ghouls. There are several ways to get into the basement where the morgue is, and waiting for them are more ghouls. Scene 5 has the investigators go to the police station to look for Billy Cooper, a suspicious police officer. After some social interactions, they realize that he is not there. Instead, he's at the graveyard, and with him are a number of ghouls. Scene 6 has the investigators going to Professor Peter Warren's house. He's currently not at home, which gives the investigators the option of breaking in. Inside his house is a puzzle box with another sliding puzzle for players to complete. At some point, Peter Warren does show up with a pack of ghouls, leading to more combat. There is an optional 7th scene in case you want more combat, where a night gaunt ambushes the investigators, but quite honestly, there's already been so much combat in this adventure, I don't really think it's necessary. There are also other locations for the investigators to explore, such as Velma's Diner, where they can enlist the help of Agnes Baker, the Old Magic Shop, where they can potentially get new spells, and the River Docks, where they can purchase some interesting black market gear. Act 3, Hunger from Below, consists of 3 scenes. The first, So What's the Plan, is in preparation for the big finale. Investigators level up and they can go to any of the locations mentioned before. Once the investigators are ready, they begin the trek through Arkham Woods, which brings about its own set of dangers as the investigators might end up nauseated from the smell of the corpses. The final confrontation begins deep underground. Using all of the clues gathered in the adventure, the investigators should have knowledge on how to disrupt the ritual to summon Umorthoth. Speaking of which, not only will the investigators have to contend with the ghouls, but also Umorthoth's tentacles. In order for the investigators to succeed, they must incapacitate Narragath, the cult's leader, or give in to Umorthoth's demands by sacrificing Leda Chandler. If the investigators manage to defeat Narragath, they will still need to escape a collapsing cave, but the scars of what they've witnessed will stay with them for the rest of their lives. Overall, the components for Arkham Horror are very good. They all have that top-notch quality that you'd expect from the board games. And that brings me to my biggest critique. This game plays and feels like a board game. In fact, this very well could have been something akin to like a 3.5 edition or 4th edition for Arkham Horror the board game. But what stops it from getting there is its lack of replayability. The artwork is mostly taken from the Arkham Horror property over the years. All the characters are from the board game and card games, and it's all the same, as are all of the monsters. I don't mind this as much as it keeps things consistent among the property overall. I just wish there was something new. But then again, we did get like some pretty sweet maps, so I guess I can't complain too much. Arkham Horror the role-playing game. Where does it really fit in? It's kind of just like the card game, but with the possibility for role-playing. The adventure makes too much use of combat for my taste, and yeah, I know some people are gonna like that bit of pulp in their role-playing games, or horror role-playing games rather. But I also like knowing that when combat happens, if it happens, it's gonna be very deadly, and the players are gonna have to make some very tough choices, like who are they gonna sacrifice first. Here, combat is expected. It's gonna happen. That doesn't mean the characters might not die. That's a very real possibility. It's just less likely because the characters are, well, they're built for pulp. They're expected to fight and have combat capabilities. Would I ever play Arkham Horror, the role-playing game, with my gaming group? No. There are other horror role-playing games that kind of do what I want a little bit better. The mechanics, while interesting, don't really grab me the same way other role-playing games do. While it is still thematically horror, it's just too pulpy for me. If I had to describe Arkham Horror the role-playing game in a nutshell, I would say that it's a little bit more in-depth version of the board game of the same name. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Give this video a huge thumbs up to support the series, and I will see you guys in the next video.